I'm 76 years old. My husband Richard died 3 years ago this coming April, and there's something he never knew about our marriage, something I kept from him for 51 years. I'm telling you this now because I don't have the luxury of waiting anymore, and because carrying it alone doesn't make sense when I can see the end of my own road clearly enough to count the miles. This isn't about redemption. I don't think I get that. But maybe someone listening will understand something I didn't until it was far too late to do anything about it. Richard and I married in June of 1968. I was 25, he was 27. We met at a library fundraiser in Columbus, Ohio, where I was working as a secretary and he was finishing his degree in civil engineering. He had this way of listening that made you feel like whatever you were saying mattered more than anything else in the room. I'd never experienced that before. My father barely looked up from his newspaper most evenings, and my previous boyfriend, Tom Henniger, talked more than he breathed. Richard was different. He asked questions. He remembered details. When I mentioned I liked yellow roses once in passing, he showed up 2 weeks later with a single yellow rose because he'd finally found one at a flounder's shop across town. We were married 8 months after we met. Everyone said it was fast, but it didn't feel fast. It felt inevitable. The truth I kept from him was simple, and it was terrible. I never loved him the way he loved me. I cared for him deeply. I admired him. I was grateful for him. I built a life with him that was good and stable and full of things that looked like love from the outside. We had 2 children, Michael and Sarah. We had a house in Worthington with a backyard Richard spent years perfecting, planting dogwoods and building a stone path that curved around the garden beds. We had routines. Friday night dinners at the same Italian restaurant for 30 years, Sunday morning crosswords at the kitchen table, annual trips to Lake Erie every August. But I was never in love with him, not the way he was with me. I knew this on our wedding day. I remember standing in the back of the church in my mother's altered dress, holding my father's arm, and thinking very clearly, this is not what it's supposed to feel like. I thought I was supposed to feel overwhelmed, breathless, certain. I felt calm, practical. I felt like I was making a smart decision, and I told myself that was enough. That the wild, aching kind of love I'd read about in books or seen in movies wasn't real anyway. That what Richard and I had was better, steadier, more likely to last. I was 25 and afraid of ending up alone like my Aunt Maureen, who worked at the post office until she was 70 and lived in a basement apartment that smelled like boiled vegetables. Richard was kind and reliable and wanted me. That felt like enough, so I married him, and I never told him the truth. For years, I thought I'd made the right choice. Our life was good. Richard got a job with the county, working on infrastructure projects, and I stayed home with the kids until they were both in school, then worked part-time at a dentist's office doing billing. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We laughed at the dinner table. We took care of each other when we were sick. We showed up to Michael's baseball games and Sarah's piano recitals. From the outside, we looked like everyone else, but I always knew. There were moments when it showed itself clearly, when Richard would reach for my hand while we were watching television, and I'd let him hold it but feel nothing, when he'd tell me he loved me before bed, and I'd say it back because that's what you do, but the words felt like a script I'd memorized. When he'd planned surprises for our anniversary, little trips or gifts he'd clearly spent weeks thinking about, and I'd feel this low-grade guilt settle in my chest because I knew I'd never put that kind of thought into anything for him. I told myself it didn't matter, that love was a choice, not a feeling, that what we had was real even if it wasn't what he thought it was. My friend Barbara understood, I think. though we never said it out loud. She was married to a man named Gene for 43 years before he passed in 2019. Barbara and I met at the dentist's office where we both worked. She started there in 1981, and we had lunch together almost every weekday for the next 26 years until she retired. One afternoon in maybe 1993 or 94, we were sitting in the break room, and she was talking about Gene's retirement party the office had thrown for him the weekend before. She said, "He's a good man. I'm lucky." And there was something in the way she said it, this flatness in her voice, that made me look up. "But?" I asked. She stirred her coffee for a long time. Then she said, "But I don't think I'd choose him again. If I were young and starting over." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We both just sat there, and I knew she'd said something true that neither of us would ever say again. Barbara died last year. Stroke. She was 81. I think about that conversation a lot now. Then there was my son, Michael. He married young too, 23, to a woman named Jenna he'd been dating since high school. Jenna was nice enough, polite, helped with dishes at family dinners, laughed at Richard's jokes, but I could see it. The way Michael looked at her was dutiful, the way you look at something you're supposed to want. They divorced after 11 years. No kids, thank God. When Michael told me, he was 34 and sitting at my kitchen table, and he said, "Mom, I stayed because I thought it would get better. I thought I'd start feeling it eventually." I asked him what he meant, even though I knew. "I thought I'd fall in love with her," he said. "I kept waiting for it to happen." I should have told him then. I should have said, "I understand. I did the same thing." But I didn't. I just made him tea and said something useless about how sometimes people grow apart. He's remarried now, a woman named Amy. I can see the difference. The way he lights up when she walks into a room, the way he touches her shoulder when he passes behind her chair. That's what I never gave Richard. And then there was Richard himself, the ways he showed me over and over what I couldn't give back. In 2003, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, stage 2. They caught it early, thank God, but the treatment was brutal. Surgery, then chemotherapy that left me so weak I couldn't stand in the shower without help. Richard took 3 months off work, unpaid leave. We couldn't really afford it, but he did it anyway. He drove me to every appointment, sat in those horrible waiting rooms with the fluorescent lights and the magazines from 2 years ago, held a basin when I got sick in the car on the way home, slept on the floor next to our bed when I was too nauseous to let him near me, but too scared to be alone. One night, maybe 2 months into treatment, I woke up at 3 in the morning and he wasn't in the room. I panicked, which was unusual for me. I got up, dizzy and weak, and found him in the kitchen, sitting at the table in the dark, crying. I'd never seen him cry before, not once in 35 years of marriage. I asked him what was wrong, and he looked up at me with this raw, broken expression and said, "I can't lose you. I don't know how to be a person without you." I should have felt something enormous in that moment, gratitude, love, something. But what I felt was guilt, heavy, suffocating guilt, because I knew if it were reversed, if it were him sick and me sitting at that table, I'd be sad, I'd be worried, but I wouldn't be shattered. I went to him and held him, and I said, "You're not going to lose me." And I meant it. I fought like hell to survive that cancer, and I did. But not because I couldn't imagine a world without him, because I didn't want to leave the kids, because I wasn't ready to die. That's the truth I couldn't say. Richard retired in 2009 at 68. I retired the same year. We had 14 years together after that before he died. 14 years of slow mornings and afternoon walks and evenings on the porch watching the street go quiet. He was so happy. He'd say things like, "I waited my whole life for this, just you and me." And he'd smile at me like I was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. I smiled back. I held his hand. I cooked his favorite meals and watched the shows he liked. and listened to his stories about work projects from 30 years ago that I'd heard a dozen times before. But I wasn't happy the way he was. I was content, comfortable, but not lit up from the inside. There were times I thought about telling him. Late at night when he was asleep next to me and I was staring at the ceiling, I'd think I should tell him the truth. But I never did. Because what would it accomplish? It would destroy him. It would take the life he thought we'd built and reveal it as something else entirely. It felt cruel, so I kept it to myself, and I told myself that was the kinder choice. Richard died in November of 2022. Heart attack, sudden. He was 80 years old. He collapsed in the garage while organizing his toolbox. Sarah found him when she came by to drop off groceries. I didn't get to say goodbye. There was no warning. One day he was here, planning what to plant in the garden next spring, and the next day he was gone. At the funeral, person after person came up to me and said, "He loved you so much. You two were so lucky to have each other. 51 years, what a blessing." And I nodded and thanked them and felt like a fraud. Because the truth is, Richard died never knowing that I didn't love him the way he loved me. He died thinking we had something we didn't, and I can never fix that. I can never go back and give him the truth, or give him the chance to decide if he wanted to stay in a marriage that was built on my fear instead of my love. I took that choice from him. For 51 years, I don't know if that was kind or cowardly. Maybe both, maybe neither. But it's what I did. The thing is, I don't think Richard was unhappy. I think he had a good life. He had a wife who was faithful and present and cared about him, even if the caring looked different than he thought. He had 2 kids and a home and work he was proud of. He had 51 years of what he believed was a loving marriage. Is it worse to know the truth or to die believing a lie that made you happy? I don't know. I've been turning that question over in my mind for 3 years now, and I still don't have an answer. But I do know this. I robbed him of the chance to be loved the way he deserved. And I robbed myself of the chance to find out if I was even capable of that kind of love with someone else. I think about the life I might have had if I'd been braver at 25. If I'd said no to Richard, or if I'd been honest about what I could and couldn't give him. Maybe I'd have ended up alone. Maybe that would have been the right thing. Or maybe I'd have found someone I felt that spark with, that overwhelming, reckless kind of love. Maybe I'd have had 30 years of that instead of 51 years of going through the motions. I'll never know. If I could go back, I would wait. I would let myself be afraid of ending up alone, but I wouldn't make a life decision out of that fear. I would understand that calm and practical are not the same as love, that stability is not the same as passion, that someone being good to you doesn't mean you owe them a lifetime. What I didn't understand was that honesty, even brutal honesty, is kinder than a comfortable lie. Richard could have found someone who loved him wildly, completely, and I stole that from him because I was too afraid to be alone. I'm 76 now. I've had 3 years without Richard, and I'll probably have a few more if I'm lucky, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. I think about him every day. I miss him in the way you miss someone who was part of the furniture of your life. I wish he were here. I wish I could ask him if he ever knew, if he ever suspected. But mostly, I wish I'd been brave enough to tell him the truth when it mattered. If this meant something to you, I'm glad I told you. There are a few books that helped me think through some of this, though they came too late for me to do anything with the understanding. The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron. The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Maybe they'll mean something to you. If you're willing, leave a thought. I'd like to know I'm not alone in this. There are more stories like this on this channel. Other people my age, telling truths we kept too long. I don't have time to keep pretending anymore. None of us do.